So basically, it was gonna make, because they have 7 total.
You want this?
votes, we wanted there to be 7 pages. That was the
Did not
change.
make anything,
Yes.
okay,
No, it didn't make any sense.
didn't make any sense at all.
Good evening. Okay, good evening and welcome to the continuation of the Paxton Planning Board monthly meeting for November. Tonight, we are going to introduce, I guess, some of the work that the steering committee has been doing on the zoning bylaw rewrite. And one of the major focuses this cycle of rewriting is information pertaining to the MBTA rural adjacent community bylaws that are required now by Boston for communities that have access to the rail system that runs from Boston to Worcester, and thus Paxton is an adjacent community. And because of our rural nature, about a year ago, they created a new category, rural adjacent, so that helps us. We have contracted with the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission in Worcester to act as our consultants to help us comply with the rules and regulations in that legislation. So tonight, we have Jane Wyrick from the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission, who is going to be discussing, for information purposes, kind of how the town has started, what we've run into a little bit, and kind of where we see this going. To be compliant with the legislation, we have to have the zoning standard in place by December of '25. But it also needs to be reviewed by the legal counsel in town, the Attorney General's office, and must be approved at some point by an annual town meeting or a special town meeting. So we're kind of working to that end on the timelines, and hopefully we'll have it wrapped up. Are we getting close? Nope. Maybe? Okay. Anyway, I'll just keep talking. So the steering committee is made up of myself from the planning board, I'm Neil Bagdis of the planning board, Roberta Bryant, who is on the zoning board, Cheryl Lombardi, who is the town services coordinator and deals with zoning rules and regs and bylaw every day when people come in for permits and applications, the building commissioner, Dave Carl, and a member of the Economic Development Community, Jeremy Richards. Now, we're all kind of working under the guidelines of the current town administrator, Heather Monroe, and she just couldn't be here with us tonight, so that's no problem. We're just gonna kind of get this thing going. So it's gonna kick off. I think we're fortunate, I'll give Heather a couple of pats on the back here. She received grant funding from the state to fund this project that we're undertaking here in the amount of about $75,000. So that's helping us to defray the costs and to pay our consultant that we've contracted with to get this thing going with Central Mass Regional. So are we looking like we're going to get there, Jane? I'll turn it
Yes.
over to you, and we can go from there, or do you want me to just keep giving the background as to where we are?
Just 2 more minutes.
Okay, all right. 2 more minutes. Okay, holy cow.
You can do it, Neil.
A priest and a rabbi. No, from the information standpoint, it's important that the citizens in the community have a chance to review this information that we're going to be providing tonight and recording, and it'll be located on the town webpage, and you can click on it and watch and again, discuss. This being the first salvo as to where we're going with this, it's probably going to generate a lot of comments and concerns, and we don't want to have everything right now flooded into Cheryl's office with the phone calls when people see this. So the biggest thing to be compliant right now is we must have a zoning district set up somewhere in town to comply with the requirements of the legislation. the biggest thing that it states is we have to find a parcel somewhere in town that can handle 5% of the existing number of homes in town. And the present numbers, if I remember from previous meetings, is there's somewhere around 1,680 dwelling units in town. And if we take 5% of that, fast math is somewhere between 80 and 90 units. And they are asking that we put them into what we'll classify as high-density housing. So we've spent time going through and reviewing sites, and we're still not there in terms of saying we've picked places. But the biggest thing that I want everybody watching this tonight or listening to it tonight or whatever is this is a compliance issue only at this point. So to be compliant with the legislation, we have to have a district. Now, by being compliant, we remain active with state grant reimbursement funds and applications for grants that we would have grown accustomed to in the past. And we all know how tight budgets are in the past, tax rates and this and that. So if we don't get this project done in a timely fashion, we run the risk of being penalized for either a brief period or for a very long time in terms of grant reimbursement and applications, just like the grant that we received for this project here came from the state. There's also a grant that Heather received to work on the study for the DPW building. So again, those things would disappear. There are monies that come in from the state for us plowing the roads, the state roads in this, I believe it's section 90. Rich, does that sound good or? Okay, so that would disappear. I mean, there's just, as you start to pull the layers of the onion away and look at everything that's there, for this town, it could be somewhere between, my guess is $500,000 and $1 million. And as we go into the future, costs get higher. So we might get closer to $1 million. We don't want to put that in any jeopardy moving forward. So that's why we're undertaking the project now with the help of CMRPC. Are we good, Jane?
Yes, we are.
Okay. With that, I would like to introduce you to Jane Wyrick, who is our consultant from Central Mass Regional Planning. And with that, I'll let you kind of take it over.
And also on Zoom is Dominique Dutremble, and she will be helping to share the screen for me. So as Neil mentioned, we're going to just get into the basic requirements of the MBTA zoning. Next slide, please. So for tonight, we're going to talk about what zoning is in general and why it's important, what the goals of the housing chapter of the master plan are, what are MBTA communities and what is MBTA zoning, and what does that mean for Paxton? What happens if we don't comply? A little bit of information on multifamily housing, a timeline, and then a summary of what is expected of us. Next slide, please. So zoning are bylaws that regulate what types of uses can be used in different areas of town. Some areas are designated more for residential use, others are agricultural or open space, some commercial and industrial. Zoning also does things like regulates how land can be used to regulate things like how close a development can be from a property line, how tall a building can be, how much parking is needed, how much open space is needed. It also gets into use, things like where solar farms can go or where cell towers can go. Next slide, please. So Paxton has 3 zoning districts, General Business District B, General Residence District A, and the Business District. And so the reasons it's important is that it intends to promote public health, safety, and general welfare, to lessen congestion, to encourage housing for all income levels, and to provide things like clean water, stormwater drainage, sewage disposal, parks, schools, open space, and conservation areas. Next slide. Within Paxton's master plan and the housing chapter, there's a goal to provide housing opportunities while ensuring that new residential development is created in a controlled and well-planned manner that is consistent with the preservation of Paxton's rural small-town character. And under that goal are a few different objectives, including to provide housing opportunities that will allow residents to remain in Paxton through all stages of life, and allow children of residents to establish families here in town. It requires developers to incorporate open space provisions into new housing projects, ensure that housing regulations and bylaws are kept current to address changing concerns and legal precedents, and to encourage the use of environmentally sensitive development strategies, including low-impact development techniques. Next slide. So what are MBTA communities? Neil introduced it some. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts passed legislation that requires communities that are either served by MBTA stations or are adjacent to those communities to have land that is zoned for multifamily use by right. I think we probably all know that MBTA is the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority. This is, the new law is Section 3A of Chapter 40A, which is the zoning act for the state. Next slide. So there are 177 communities in Massachusetts that are designated as MBTA communities. There are rapid transit communities, community rail communities, adjacent communities, and adjacent small town. Because of the population in Paxton, Paxton is designated as an adjacent small town. And as such, they're required to provide the multifamily zoning for 5% of the housing, which I think on the next page, please. With 1689 existing housing units, 5% of that is 84 multifamily dwelling units. MBTA requirements require a density of 15 dwelling units per acre. And so that means that a minimum of 5.66 acres would need to be zoned for multifamily by right. And that's assuming that the entire 5.66 acres is developable. If there were to be wetlands on a parcel, then we may be looking at a little bit larger area to be able to get that kind of density in there.
Jane, can I interrupt just for 1 second?
Yes.
Can you address the density in terms of, because Paxton has on-site septic, so there are no sewers at the present time, and we don't have any long-term plans, I guess, at this point, to bring them in. So can you just kind of explain, I mean, people are probably listening to this and saying, okay, there's 10 acres across the street from me, whatever, what if they dropped it there? What do we do about septic designs and the likes?
You would have a system that's designed to accommodate the whole complex. And as we've discussed in the past, there are issues with some of the soils in Paxton.
Okay.
And there's a concern about the septic system being sufficient and wanting to set aside enough space so that there's property for a backup septic system should it need to be reinstalled.
Okay, so just to follow up on that, even though we're looking at a density of 5.6 units per acre.
15.
I'm sorry, 15 units per acre. With septic designs and this and that, it's not that, you know, a 5-acre parcel is gonna do this. I mean, we might be looking at some place that would have to have between 20 and 30, maybe 40 acres or something like that, or multiple sites in town, is that correct?
Yes, for other categories of MBTA communities, they do have a minimum of 50 acres and 750 units. The small towns do not have to meet that requirement. The larger towns would have to have at least one parcel of 25 acres and no parcel or district smaller than 5 acres.
Okay.
There's no minimum acreage size. It can be split among a couple of different parcels if we can't find a spot that's big enough to accommodate all of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide. So multifamily can take on many different forms, and according to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, their definition for multifamily is more than 3 units in one building or 2 units in more than 2 buildings. So it could be as small as just a small cluster development. Next slide. So what are the benefits of multifamily housing? Older adults who want to downsize but want to stay in their community if there aren't other options for them, they'd probably tend to live in a bigger house if there's nowhere to go because they want to stay in town. College kids can come home and have a place to rent. Small businesses can retain employees, and it can create some affordable units. There's one more that I can't see. Grandparents can stay close to their grandchildren. So we're looking at, this isn't necessarily like subsidized housing, it's just for the missing middle, people who maybe are not on the lower income level but can't really afford the higher price stuff. And new development could lower taxes. Next slide. So what happens if Paxton does not comply with the requirements? Failure to comply would mean that Paxton could lose eligibility for certain types of state funding, including the Mass Works Infrastructure Program, Local Capital Projects Fund, and the Housing Choice Initiative, as well as community planning grants, rural and small town development, as well as all of these others that you see here. Did you need a minute to look these over, or?
Yeah, just let that stay there just for a little bit.
Okay.
Any questions?
And just while you're looking, I just want to say that, so almost a third of the communities in Massachusetts are under this legislation. This is not something that is being forced upon just rural communities or communities in central Mass. It really is with the broad scale of our transit system. It really does impact almost a third of the communities. I think it's important also to stress that all this does is create a by right zone. It doesn't change any other aspects of what a real estate transaction would be. It doesn't take the property. It doesn't force a property owner to negotiate with a developer. It doesn't allow for any other advantages to utilities or to septic. It doesn't require the town to give any other advantage to a developer or against a property owner other than creating a zone where this high-density housing could occur. And with the lack of housing in the state, in particular, 150,000 housing units are needed to support the demand, the supply side, and also stabilize the housing costs that's out there. This is, I think, is an indication of the seriousness of the issue and the fact that the state is really using a stick. And typically it does offer carrots to communities, and has tried that in the past to be able to encourage development, recognizing that a lot comes along with increased residents in the community. We are not here to tell you that there aren't other impacts that would be felt, but I think it's important to know that we're complying, and it's important to comply with this, and it doesn't change anything other than creating an area of by right zoning, and I just think that's an important thing to stress.
And to add what Roberta said, this is only designating an area for this type of zoning. It does not state that anything has to be built. So it's kind of just following the requirements. All set? Yep. Next slide, please. So the timeline, as Neil mentioned earlier, for compliance for the adjacent small towns is December of 2025. Tonight, we're doing the public information session just to let people know about what the requirements are. We'll be evaluating potential MBTA districts and developing a draft plan for it. And then finalize the plan based on whatever community input we get on this. And then eventually it will be scheduled for public hearing and then town meeting. Next slide. So we have, let me see if I can minimize that at all. There we go. We've established that we need to go through this exercise to see how it might impact and or benefit the town. The more input that we get from the community, the more we can work to develop something that could work for Paxton. We have the ability, as we craft our zoning, to choose the locations, to set dimensional controls, such as lot size and setbacks, to provide design guidelines, parking requirements, and the like. Town meeting will ultimately decide. Next slide. And that's it of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Scott,
Yeah. So this is a
please
zoning-
just, Scott Runster, announce yourself, please, just so we get you
Hi.
on.
Scott Runstrom, 29 Camp Street. So this is a zoning district. So is this zoning for property that could be developed, or could this be a zoning district that already has, houses on it currently?
Either.
Yeah, or both. Yeah.
It's just
That-
any,
In that point is a good one in that if an area was selected that already has homes on it, a prospective developer has to go and negotiate and acquire and assemble all of the homes in that district in order to develop the density that the zone is there for.
Correct.
Yes.
Rich?
Rich Fenton, 3 Nipmuc Road. If it is turned down at the town meeting, are these threats implemented against the town?
Yes.
Along with a civil lawsuit.
Okay.
How long has this legislation been in effect?
It's not in effect yet. The legislation was, I guess, was passed, giving the towns up, what was it, 3.5 years, 4 years to try
it's
to be
passed.
compliant?
The larger
Passed by the
communities
legislature.
have to be in compliance sooner.
That's right.
And the mid-sized ones or adjacent ones that aren't small towns
Yeah.
have another year, and the small towns have another 2 years.
When did this pass the legislature, though?
Governor Baker was still in office. They sent out the draft guidelines about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Circulated them for comment. They received a lot of comment. They didn't have the designation of the small towns in the initial set of guidelines, and there was a lot of comments about what do small towns that don't have utilities do.
Right.
So they came up with different regulations. Initially, all of the communities had to zone 50 acres, for 750 units at that density of 15 dwelling units per acre. But they realized that there should be different requirements for the small rural towns.
Has there anybody challenged this through the court system that you know of?
Did you say through the court
Through
system?
the court system, yeah.
No, there were some communities that initially did not comply. I believe one is still not complying, and that community is in a lawsuit right now.
Okay, okay. And the reason I ask is in a past life, I grew up in New Jersey. They had the same type of thing, and it went into the courts, and it got pretty ugly for the towns, so.
I think the opportunity, too, for those that are interested in participating in the process of selecting a series of areas or a single area, is that you can look at also what can be preserved at the same time. So current farmland, single owned parcels of land that are under, one family or one name, things that provide Paxton its character along Pleasant Street or Richards Ave, certainly, farmlands, open space, the parks are protected already, but I just think it also gives another bite at the apple to think about, almost like starting over, like where would you put more dense development? Is the responsibility to do it as close to the transit line as possible, being, Worcester or Leicester even, or is the decision made on a series of other factors, like places where infrastructure already does exist, to the degree that it does exist in Paxton. And I think Neil brings up a good point that nothing is easy in Paxton in terms of larger scale development. We just don't have the utilities that a city, does have. So there are a significant number of hurdles that a developer would have to get over in order to be successful. And one is the acquisition of multiple parcels, and 2 is septic, and 3 is, the fact that there's no gas utility in the city. So all of these things, one would say, don't change with this at all, with this zoning bylaw. And I think it's important to remember that as we begin the process of thinking through strategically, where would you want development, even though I do think that's a really big hurdle. I think this is just a plan on a paper, in all honesty.
Yes, Scott.
A couple more questions. We do have, not much, but we do have some high-density housing in terms of the senior development that's over off of Route 31. Would that qualify as part of the units that we need?
Well, it really, it doesn't.
I don't know.
No, because there cannot be any age restrictions.
Gotcha.
Okay, but one of the interesting things that as we go through this zoning bylaw review, not just for MBTA, but for the entire town, with the development over the whole Paxton Hills, or whatever was over its name, we had limitations in terms of height. Buildings could be 2.5 stories tall, or things like that, because of the apparatus that we have in town to fight a fire if something were to happen. So I don't mean, and I don't want to alarm anybody at this point that we're going to build high, we're going to build 5- and 6-story units, because we just don't have, again, all of the pieces in place to do that. So, and it's, I'm going to say this another way. It's your town, but it's your voice. So this is the first information session that we're getting out to the public. This process began sometime in June, and we kind of dove into the MBTA because it was unknown to all of it, what was going to be required. But we're going through everything in terms of, lot sizes. We're going through setbacks. We're going through upland requirements. We're going through accessory use apartments and things like that. The community is aging, and there are new homes being built that they want in-law apartments and things like that. And the standard zoning that we have right now may not allow for that to be a comfortable situation with families. So again, it's your town, it's your voice, and we hope that you will start to participate in more of these information sessions and give us voice your concerns to us so we can do a good job for the community. Yes, Rich?
If an area is zoned and the owner of the property does not wish to sell for development, what's the options?
Well, it's not a mandate. It's just,
The threats, it's not a mandate?
No, wait a second. The overlay district would it just gets dropped over an area. It doesn't mean that you're forced to sell. It doesn't mean that, there is not a big hammer and a club here. It's just, this right now, what we're looking at is to be compliant with the current legislation. So it doesn't mean that if your home, let's just say you had a house or a lot that had 15 acres or 18 acres, and it was beautiful, pristine land or whatever, and a developer came to you and said, okay, this is what we want to do. We're going to make you an offer. You don't have to accept, you don't have to do anything. Nothing has to change. Other than to be compliant, we have to find an area or areas in town to get us the density that we can get 84 units on and do that. So I'm not sounding the sirens and the alarms right now. This is not what this is about. It's to inform the community, the public here, as to what we're trying to do, and we can do it better with input from the community instead of letting the steering committee and whatever. Few individuals have the voice. It's better to have a larger voice with the community involved.
And to follow up, it's not a development requirement, it's just a zoning requirement. So legally, the document in the zoning bylaw would say that this is allowed on a piece of property, but nothing has to be built there.
Right. It can stay in your family forever. Yes, Scott?
So we have, you mentioned the 3 zoning districts in town, the business, A and B. There's also a number of overlay districts in our zoning bylaws. Would those overlay districts still apply for things like watershed protection, setbacks for so it's just changing the underlying zoning, but if you said it's a wetland and you can't build there, it doesn't change that.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, no, we can have overlay on top of overlay, or half of an overlay on top of something else. It's just the way that it will settle out at that point.
And if I can add, if anything were to even come to fruition, like a developer came in, they'd still have to do site plan review, stormwater, all that. They'd still have to follow along with all that. It's not like a total gimme, if you want to call it.
Yeah, all this is going to do, it's a by right for high-density development.
Correct.
They want to go through that. That's really all this does. So,
Right.
we still have guidelines to, hold their feet to the fire to make sure that it fits with the rural character and the likes of that. And as I said, right now, one of the things is we have a 2.5-story limitation on height. So don't get nervous that if, you're going to live in a community and all of a sudden there's going to be a 6-story building behind you somewhere. That's just not going to happen. Okay? I'd like to thank you two for showing up in terms of public awareness. I know it was mentioned last night at the special town meeting, but as you go back and you talk with friends and relatives and neighbors, and just mention that this is something going on. It will be posted on the town website. It may be on the signboards, as you see out here when the next information session is, but we need input from the community at large. We really, really do, and we would appreciate all of that. So I guess, any other questions?
Nice presentation.
Thank you.
Actually, I do have a question. Jeff Kent, 899 Pleasant Street. I'm also on the Paxton Planning Board. This is more for those that are listening in now or for later. Can you tell why or why not the town of Paxton is not exempt from this mandate?
Because it borders Worcester, and Worcester is a commuter rail community.
All right, so that leads into the point I'm making, is that there's no MBTA service here in Paxton. The closest servicing, if you can even consider it a station, is actually a bus stop that is 5 miles from the town line, and it's on Sunny Hill Drive, and it's in a residential area. I've used Union Station. It's about 10 miles from my house, and when I factor in the drive time and what I have to pay for parking and so forth, I guess the point I'm leading up is that for most residents in the town of Paxton, we don't use the commuter rail system. And I think it's a stretch to say that we have to, or excuse me, it's a stretch saying that we take advantage of the MBTA system here. That's all I got to say, Neil.
Okay.
Thank you for your comments.
You have a follow? I can kind of answer that a little bit. Okay. I guess one of the things, and I appreciate the concern, because as the planning board, when we went to some of the seminars on the MBTA when it started, and Cheryl and I were kicking the dates around, it started sometime in 2020. And then there were seminars or webinars that we attended and went to and this and that, and I believe, Jeff, you saw some of them too. We have to think into the future. And again, not the future of 2 years from now, but maybe 10 years or 15 years from now. And the bus transportation system out of the city, at one point, I mean, growing up in town here, I mean, my wife used to pick up a bus at the Common, and it would take them down into Worcester, and then that stopped. But in the next 15, 20, 30 years, whatever, that may be added back in, so that there would be bus service from the center of town or from someplace in Paxton to Worcester, and then you transfer and get to the train station or whatever you want to do. So we have to be a little farsighted versus nearsighted. We can't look at how it affects today, but what may happen in the next 15 or 20 or years beyond that. So I think that's kind of where this is headed, or why they're trying to do this.
Probably.
Okay. Rich?
I think it was about 7 years ago or so, the MBTA had buses running in Paxton, and they were discontinued because nobody used them.
Okay. Right, no, and again, that's a choice that they make based on the feasibility of running the routes and the expenses and this and that. But if zoning like this came in and there was a development put somewhere and people could find a way to get to those services, they may take advantage of them. But I agree, today we are a very mobile society. We drive everybody drives to wherever they want to go. And with the holiday season here, there's going to be a lot of people on the road tonight and tomorrow and whatever, so. Other questions? Okay. With that, then, I would like to close this informational session. And as I said, it's your town, it's your voice. So please, please follow on the website what's coming. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.